Hello and welcome back to me trying to beat Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition with all the enemies and all the bosses turned into the final boss, Gwyn. If you haven't watched the first episode in this series where I tackled the Northern Undead Asylum, I highly recommend watching that one first, as many of the strategies I mentioned in that video are frequently used throughout this one. Also, if it wasn't clear, this was an all boss run since that's the only real way to play a FromSoft game. So let's get right into it. When I landed in Firelink, I immediately noticed some Gwyns stalking me, wanting a piece of my now well calloused ass. If you recall from the last video, Gwyns have a massive aggro range. I want to go into a little detail about how the Gwyn AI works. From what I could tell, Gwyn can be in one of three states. The first state is an idle T-pose state and only applies to certain replacements, including non-hostile enemies, friendly NPCs, or enemies that have a special type of aggro. An example of this would be some of the Ents in Darkroot Garden that don't come out of their burrow until you walk past them. The second state Gwyn can be in is the one you're seeing now, which is a walking aggro state. Unless the Gwyn is a special case that can have an idle state, all Gwyns loaded into the game will be in this state. The third state Gwyn can be in is his running aggro state, which activates once he's within a certain distance of you. When Gwyn enters this state, he will remain in it until you die. Thus, I learned a very important lesson early on in Firelink. Because Gwyns are for the most part always aggroed, this introduces the possibility of getting spawn killed at the bonfire. Therefore, the bonfires that would be safe would be those that are either in an area where there are no loaded hostile Gwyns nearby, an area with low hanging ceilings that stop Gwyns from reaching me, or an area where I can bait the Gwyns into jumping off into a death plane, which was the case for Firelink. I had to bait these Gwyns every single time I spawned in Firelink, which also made leveling a bit hectic. I can't complain though, because with each Gwyn dropping 70,000 souls for free, leveling up to a manageable level barely took any time at all. I raised my vitality, endurance, and strength up to level 50 and decided that was good enough to get started. My first objective was to get a higher damage weapon, and the most practical option was the Zweihander. Though it was intimidating, most of the enemies in the graveyard have this special aggro I was talking about earlier, so it only took a few attempts to sprint through them all and get the sword. After spending Asylum only doing 20 damage per hit, I felt an immense sense of power rush over my body. Now it was time to see what this bad boy was made of. That's pretty decent. Now instead of hitting Gwyn 125 times to kill him, I only needed to hit him 46 times. This was a huge improvement, especially considering that I didn't have to worry as much about one-shots anymore. But it still wasn't good enough. About 80% of this run's route was guided by the ultimate goal of achieving the highest level of survivability, which meant getting the highest damage output, the highest amount of defense, and the maximum amount of healing ability through miracles or Estus Flasks, all while killing bosses along the way. Thus, my next objective was to reinforce my Zweihander, so I started heading toward Andre. My first obstacle was this Gwyn in the tunnel. Fortunately, Gwyns are rather tall and unable to fit through most of the entrances that the player utilizes, a fact I exploited ad nauseum over the course of this entire run. Unfortunately, the side of the tunnel reignited the trauma of the Asylum and caused me to revert back to a state in which I thought jump attacking was the only option. After defeating him and trying to stave off a torrent of negative thoughts while walking through the tunnel, it wasn't long before I was closed off again by two more Gwyns. Getting blocked by Gwyns and whittling their health down was going to be a constant theme of this run. But while we're here, I can explain something interesting that's going on in this area. Notice how the Gwyns aren't endlessly running into the archway like the Gwyns in the Asylum. In most games, enemies generally don't follow you to the ends of the earth. They usually de-aggro once you get far enough away and return to their spawn points. My theory is that, at least in Dark Souls 1, there are areas in the game that contain invisible walls that de-aggro enemies. For brevity's sake, let's just call these aggro walls, since they block aggressive states. Aggro walls are generally impermeable to enemies, but if you elicit certain attacks close to them, the enemies can be forced through with a bit of effort. These walls are area specific, and if an enemy gets through one wall, they will be stuck at the next one if reached. Due to Gwyn's status as a boss, he will de-aggro once hitting the wall only temporarily and soon after re-aggro, creating a cycle of running into the aggro wall and walking backwards, like what is happening here. This is mostly just my speculation on how it works, so it might not be exactly correct. In the context of this run, aggro walls are just another tool I can use to safely attack or run away from Gwyns. Shortly after taking those guys out, several health bars threatened me from a distance. I waited for them to resolve themselves before going inside the house and once again getting blocked by Gwyns. From here, I was able to clear out all the Gwyns that spawn outside the bonfire, which I refrained from resting at due to concerns of getting spawn killed. The nuclear fusion occurring in the distance convinced me to take a detour to the merchant before continuing towards Andre. I walked down the stairs and noticed a Gwyn that was obviously too shy to make eye contact with me. Gwyn-chan eventually gained the confidence to express her feelings to me, and after accepting her confession, I respawned at Firelink. Since I had just spent over 45 minutes futilely trying to get to Andre, I decided to check out if I could get to Vamos instead. I made a quick stop to join this bullhead's cult to buy healing miracles, and made my way towards the catacombs. I found a relatively safe route that got me through the graveyard and was able to trap the pursuing Gwyns on the outside of the cave. Though it wasn't that difficult to just keep running through it all, the entrance to the bonfire is blocked by a Gwyn trapped inside the tunnel, meaning that if I wanted to open the way through, I would have to deal with him and by proxy all the Gwyns around him. The main obstacle to achieving this was luring these Gwyns out of their idle states and getting back up the ladder before getting ganked. I never managed to do it, but my efforts were rewarded with the sighting of a secret Gwyn. Neat. During my attempts to get to Vamos, I went to New Londo, which was now populated by a congregation of T-posing Gwyns. I took care not to disturb their sacred ritual and went to see Rickert, who is also a smith. Too bad he's a useless one because he doesn't sell any Titanite shards. As far as I know, there are very few, if any, Titanite shards in any of the areas I can reach currently. Though Hollow Soldiers typically drop shards, the randomizer settings I used only allowed drops that are guaranteed by a non-responding enemy, like mimics. After about an hour and a half of failing to get to Vamos, I once again tried to get to the Undead Merchant. This time, I was able to bait the Gwyns out of the merchant building to the spot where I lured all the Gwyns previous to them. I finally made it to the merchant and bought nearly everything he had just in case I ran into something unexpected. However, I'll just mention the things that actually made a difference. The most important thing I bought here was the short bow and 999 of each arrow. That's right, I was willing to stoop to that level for this run. Another item I bought was repair powder, which I needed after hitting and shooting these Gwyns hundreds of times with the weak weaponry I had. And yes, I literally mean hundreds. Heavy arrows dealt 42 damage, coming out to 100 arrows needed to kill Gwyn. Standard arrows dealt 29 damage, or 145 arrows to kill. And finally, wooden arrows dealt 22 damage, or 191 arrows to kill. I also bought all the throwing items to use as backups if I ran out of arrows, but they barely did any damage either. Lastly, I bought the chainmail armor, which I consider to be the ugliest armor in the game. With the option of ranged attacks, I felt way more confident. I decided to take the risk of getting spawn killed and rested at the Undead Berg bonfire, and what do you know? It's a gank fest. The only thing I could do here was pray that I got lucky and made it back to the building where I cheesed them earlier. After that, I just went to the next building and repeated the process. That was going to be a lot of this run, baiting Gwyns and running to cover while waiting for them to kill each other, then finishing the last one left. Now, this doesn't mean it wasn't difficult. Gwyns have a faster running speed than me, and getting jump slashed is going to hurt a lot if I didn't make it in time. I cleared out all the Gwyns outside the tower leading to the boss, learned that the Gwyns in this world were being delivered via Amazon Prime, and learned a new mechanic. Similar to the R1 strat I used to bait Gwyns into attacking each other in the tunnel of the Asylum, I found that I could get a relatively similar and more reliable effect by using an item. This effect works with empty Estus bottles, throwing knives, carvings, just about anything. I used this technique to get rid of one of the Gwyns that replaced the archers in the boss arena without even going through the fog gate. After one of them died, I entered the fog gate and quickly went up the ladder while the remaining archer fell off trying to get to me. I was completely safe up here. Although Gwyn can jump slash, he can't gain enough height to jump to most, if any, of the areas that are reached by a ladder. Now the issue was how to get rid of the archer. Unfortunately, the Taurus Gwyn did not leave his idle animation even after getting hit with arrows, so I'd have to deal with him separately. I spent a stupid amount of time missing this bitch like a bitch because the angle was just not in my favor. When he finally went down, I shuffled toward the Taurus Gwyn and got my ass slapped running away. but it's okay, really. All I had to do to get back to the boss again was sit through another hour of Gwyns killing each other, which gave me a lot of time to reflect on whether or not this run was really worth the clout. I entered the boss arena again, and this time around, I had a better idea for the Taurus Gwyn. I shot about 250 arrows into this Gwyn, and obviously that wasn't working, even though the arrows were making contact and staggering him. I aggroed him from the bridge with my bow and this time successfully pussied my way back up the ladder. He got stuck in a particularly annoying spot, where I had to wait about 20 seconds for an opportunity to get a shot in. I did get cocky towards the end and almost thwarted an hour of effort by missing a drop attack, but I managed to save it. Having gone through Asylum for 16 hours, I was okay with plugging my way through this run if it meant avoiding crazy long penalties for death. After cheesing some more Gwyns and saying hi to Solaire, I ran across the bridge and kicked down the shortcut ladder. Now you probably don't think about this too often, but there are a fuck ton of enemies in Undead Parish. Including the ones on the bridge, there are over 40 enemies, which means for me, there are over 40 Gwyns. Of course, I just tried running through, but the Gwyns would either catch up with me or block my path, making the strategy of clearing them out the only viable option. I didn't go for the Altar of Sunlight bonfire right after the bridge, as I would have been spawn killed out of fucking existence and this run would be over. Thankfully, the Undead Berg bonfire spawned me with enough time to make it up the ladder safely, and the room above was a perfect spot to bait Gwyns to. I applied the same strategy I used in Undead Berg, which was to bait Gwyns here and slowly clear them out. This is where I learned a bit about enemy loading mechanics. Notice that though the parish is loaded in terms of appearance, the Gwyn doesn't load in until I take a couple steps forward. I'm not completely sure how it works, but what I do know is that the distance required to load and unload enemies varies from area to area. The problem in Undead Parish was that the loading distances seemed to be especially small. which made this part of the run a great deal harder. It would have been preferable to have all 40-something Gwyns come at me at once so they could all kill each other, but instead I can only bait 1 or 2 Gwyns at a time, and the further away I got from where I wanted to bait them, the more likely it was that they would catch up with me. If you recall, it takes at least 100 arrows to kill a single Gwyn. Even though having 999 of each arrow wasn't enough to kill all the Gwyns, it was the first method I employed before resorting to jump attacks because it was much safer. More importantly, the bow could lock on and I could just hit R1 endlessly without paying any attention to the screen. This allowed me to multitask while shooting hundreds of arrows into these Gwyns. I cooked, ate lunch, cleaned, listened to the entirety of the Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 soundtracks, wrote the script, practiced my instrument, went to a movie, fought the Soul of Cinder on New Game Plus 7, all while continuing to press R1 and kill these Gwyns. Also, get good. I tried using the tunnel to bait the Gwyns, hoping that even though I was at a different height, they would still be able to follow me, but I think the loading mechanics got in the way. I also tried to manipulate the loading zones, but it's quite terrifying when Gwyn's grossly incandescent light doesn't load in immediately and he comes flying around the corner like a guided missile. Once I got to this point in the route, the strategy changed a little. There was a low-hanging ceiling here, so now I didn't have to go all the way back to the shortcut ladder. During this section, I walked extremely slow with my audio on high so that I could listen for Gwyn's footsteps to indicate when he would be loaded in, after which I would have to start running like hell to avoid a jump slash. Upon luring them to this bridge, they would eventually jump off to the area below and attempt to get to me by running into the ladders they couldn't climb. I had to bait them to kill each other here because once I got to this intersection, they would change their path to one that actually met up with me. In an attempt that was over an hour in the making, I got pretty close to Andre and decided to book it. It ended as you would expect, and I didn't do something so careless like that again. That is a lie because I totally fell off this tower like a damned idiot. Following another 40-minute journey to restock on arrows, I shuffled my way through Undead Parish and finally reached the bonfire after over 4.5 hours of attempts, the successful one taking an hour and 53 minutes to achieve. I was rewarded with a bonfire that was, for all intents and purposes, safe. The Gwyn that replaced the Titanite demon did aggro once I entered the old parish, but after it's defeated, it wouldn't respawn again, and the Gwyns from the previous area behind me got stuck on the low-hanging ceiling when trying to go down the stairs. I had never been happier to see Andre in my life. More accurately, I hadn't been happier to hear Andre in my life as he had been turned into a Gwyn. I bought 99 Titanite shards, the Crest of Artorias, smith boxes, arrows, as well as everything else he sold with the 4 million souls I had acquired. The only other thing I bought was a Kestis, in remembrance of Pegpa, the ultimate technique. I upgraded my armor and shield as high as I could, and more importantly, reinforced my Zweihände and shortbow to +5. I easily picked up the Firekeeper soul and opened the elevator shortcut to Firelink by just bolting through. I picked up the Undead Asylum key, reinforced my Estus flask, and continued my journey to achieve even greater power. For reference, I now dealt 78 damage with heavy arrows from my bow, and 324 damage with the jump slash, cutting the amount of attacks needed to kill for the former by roughly a half and the latter by roughly 2/3. I felt great, but not good enough. I wanted to absolutely annihilate these Gwyns that had caused me so much pain. My next goal was to acquire the Demon's Great Axe, as at +15, it would give me the highest damage that could be dealt to a Gwyn. To get this, I needed to travel through Darkroot Garden, join the Forest Hunters Guild, talk to Shiva, then travel all the way down to Blighttown's floor to purchase it from him. On the way, I also wanted to pick up the Stone Armor set, one of the highest defense sets in the game until Havel's set became available. Starting from here on out, I was also looking for Titanite chunks, as I would not be able to farm these like in a normal run. With all that being said, I began my long quest to achieve all of that shit, starting with Darkroot Garden. Around this point in the game, I did feel confident enough to fight Gwyns one-on-one if I got particularly bored, but this was rare as the roads were long and full of Gwyns, so I usually just pussied out and used my bow. A little further into the garden, I would bait Gwyns to jump off this cliff here. I lit the bonfire, but I didn't rest at it in fear of getting spawn killed. After the ceremony, I opened the door and proceeded to the next area. Like I mentioned in the previous video, I wasn't able to change the forest hunters with the randomizer, so I just made swift work of them. I got killed by a great sword wielding wall right before the stone armor, and on the way back I spent an immense amount of time just trying to kill a single Gwyn. I joined the forest hunters, talked to Shiva, and got the stone armor. At this point, my endurance was not high enough to sustain a normal roll, so I just mixed and matched armor. Now it was time to go to Blighttown. I made my way down Darkroot Basin without any issues and rested at the bonfire outside of the Valley of Drakes elevator. In the Valley of Drakes, I simply baited them to get stuck on the low-hanging ceiling of the elevator and killed them all there. At the entrance of Blighttown, there was another aggro wall that made things pretty easy. I knew getting through the upper areas was going to be relatively painless because of all the ladders the Gwyns couldn't climb. Most of them just flung themselves off trying to get to me, even without me trying to bait them on the ladders. There were also a couple of cases of Gwyns getting stuck in a fall animation. I got another Firekeeper soul and made my way down to the bottom part of Blighttown. This is where things get difficult. Shiva was right below me, but there was also an army of Gwyns marching to slap my ass. Thankfully, while waiting for them to kill each other, I learned from the wiki that the giant mosquitoes don't actually respawn infinitely. If there were any infinitely respawning enemies in this run, I'd be totally fucked. Also, if you were wondering, the Gwyns were immune to the poison, so I couldn't rely on that to take them out. It became clear that the most powerful Gwyn was the one that survived the Civil War. He demonstrated this to me by showing me his ability of precognition, by dodging every single fucking shot I made immediately as the arrow left my bow. The fucker even hit Shiva a couple times and Goomba stomped him, and it scared the shit out of me. After killing him, I bought the Demon's Great Axe from Shiva, but I didn't use it for a while because it wasn't reinforced and it was just too heavy for my character right now. Now I had a difficult choice to make. Did I want to go to the bonfire near here or just risk it and try to beat Gwynlag now? My trip from the bonfire to this point had already taken an hour, and I did not want to go through killing all of those fucking Gwyns again. So after a brief search of the area for Titanite chunks, I entered Gwynlag's domain. This particular cutscene wasn't the best, though it did show a twitching disembodied Gwyn head. I had been extremely anxious before this fight, but my training in Asylum had served me well and Gwynlag was a piece of cake. I rung the Bell of Awakening and tried to visit Gwynlag's sister. Now, what's about to happen was the strangest thing I experienced in the run. I can't even understand why such a thing would happen, and I apologize for not having the audio of me screaming hysterically when it did. I had to talk to her servant Gwyn to get past, but I was being extra cautious since I knew he may aggro on me the second he broke out of his idle animation. He swung at me, but didn't damage me. This isn't the weird part. I thought, oh, apparently now I have a friendly Gwyn companion. Friendly. I could not predict how wrong I would be. Out of fucking nowhere, this madman started killing the one he swore to protect. I was freaking the fuck out, I couldn't believe it. I panicked for a while and then just rested at the bonfire hoping that would somehow save her. That seemed to calm him down, for now at least. If you can think of any explanation for this, please let me know. I could not figure out why an NPC would hurt another NPC in the game, especially when both of them are initially friendly. Anyway, I had her reinforce my Estus, and this asshole, who had the gall to call his latest victim of violent assault his fair lady, wouldn't let me pass. Instead, he just T-posed on me. I used the Homeward Miracle and was able to move his position, but he kept his gaze focused on his prey. I made sure to rest at the Demon Ruins bonfire because there was no way in hell I was going through Blighttown again. I reinforced my Demon's Great Axe to +5 and leveled my endurance with the 7 million souls I had acquired. At this point, my damage output wasn't that much different from the Zweihander. Now it was time to leave this fucking hell, which unfortunately was not going to be easy. First off, there were a fuck ton of Gwyns that want a piece of this juicy dumper, and because it was so juicy, the bog slows it down a lot. Additionally, the swamp doesn't affect Gwyn's movement speed at all, and considering that they are already faster than me outside of the swamp, it would be pretty hard to simply outrun them. I did try using this aggro wall to kill them, but from this area, the loading distances were not kind to me, forcing me to go out and load Gwyns every so often so that I could clear them out. Also, in classic Blighttown style, I lagged out my game for the first time this run. I spent a long time trying to clear out the Gwyns before opting to just book it again. After a few tries and a lot of luck, I eventually got past them all. After that, I easily got to Firelink by going through the Valley of Drakes in New Londo and found that someone had killed one of the only non-Gwyn beings in this world. My rage was soon overcome by fear as the Gwyns of Firelink tried to rain greatswords down upon my ass and send me back to the beginning of Blighttown. I retreated to the Valley of Drakes and this time went through Darkroot Basin, picking up the Grass Crest shield along the way, which would become my main shield due to its stamina regeneration. My next goal was to get the Lord Vessel because I didn't want to spend hours back traveling through legions of Gwyns, so I set my sights on the second bell. This time, getting through Undead Parish was a great deal easier as I didn't have to bait as many Gwyns, and the ones that I did have to bait I could take down way more quickly. Before long, I had made it to the Gwyngoyles. My favorite part about this cutscene was that the greatswords were loaded in perfectly. You can also see that the second gargoyle is actually loaded into the cutscene despite not moving at all in it. A point that I should make is that the boss battles really aren't that difficult at all, since most of them only have a single Gwyn, whereas everywhere else in the game has multiple. Ironically, despite there being 2 Gwyns in this boss battle, I was able to beat them without even using a single Estus, dealing 500 damage per parry. I rang the second bell and opened the gate to Sen's Fortress. Back at Undead Parish, there's actually something new here. Instead of an aggro wall, there was a teleporting wall that returned the Gwyns to their spawn point after they had made contact with it without de-aggroing them. It was actually worse than having no aggro wall at all, as I couldn't lay into them with arrows and basically just had to fight them fairly, which became rather difficult even though I had just fought 2 Gwyns no problem. Inside Sen's Fortress, I baited Gwyns into jumping off the bridges whenever I could, picked up the Ring of Steel Protection to up my defense, trapped some Gwyns behind doors, and fought a decent amount without cheesing. On the rooftop, the positioning of the bonfire allowed me to just stand there while Gwyns overshot their jumps from above and fell to their deaths, clearing out almost the entire area. I met with the crestfallen merchant and bought some green blossoms as well as a full inventory of large titanite shards, the latter of which aren't useful to me until I get the large ember. I killed the iron golem and hitched a ride to Anor Londo. Now, the Batwing demons didn't get replaced in the cutscene on the way there, but during a scuffle I accidentally selected the option to go back to Sen's Fortress. This allowed me to witness Gwyn's disembodied head lift me up with his magical polygon powers and transport me back. The beginning of Anor Londo gave me a bit of trouble, but I eventually just ran through it all and used the elevator to trap them below as well as to bait them into falling down. This bonfire wasn't completely safe as Gwyns from both sides would start walking toward me, but I could just run to the elevator to avoid them. I scaled the sides of the building and got up to the rafters without any issues. I hope you weren't expecting some sort of epic battle on the rafters because the Gwyns had already fallen off by the time I got there. I pushed the thing, taunted a Gwyn after definitely not dying 30 seconds before, and rested at the Gwyn bonfire. Also, this happened. Get back, On the other side of Anor Londo, I basically just had all the Gwyns kill themselves and ran to the bonfire. This entire section can basically be summed up as door, fireplace, door, stairs, and door. I picked up Havel's armor along the way, but didn't equip it because it was still too heavy, although I did equip the shield if I ever wanted to just tank anything. I ignored a magic 8-ball trying to whisk me away to a Gwynless world, and entered the fog gate. I then witnessed one of the greatest cutscenes in the run, so I just want to let it play in its entirety. I did die once, but when I came back, I managed to empty both of their health bars. My efforts were rewarded with another great cutscene. After that amazing display of polygons from the tall boy, I easily defeated him, snagged the great bow outside, and completed my mission of getting the Lord Vessel. The great bow actually wasn't as big a help as I thought it'd be, since the advantage of higher damage output was effectively cancelled out by a longer animation time. Having the Lord Vessel would cut time spent going through some of the areas I'd already cleared. I returned to Firelink, placed the Lord Vessel, and continued my quest to better myself. My next objective was to get Havel's ring, which was no issue. Since I was there, I decided to get the first part of the DLC entry requirements. A low-hanging ceiling once again made this part a breeze, and I freed Dust from her Gwyn captor. After that, it was time to get the Embers from the Depths and New Londo so that I could reinforce my Demon's Great Axe into the Demon's Greatest Axe. Laura and Deadburg was a rather difficult area for the same reasons getting through Undead Parish was difficult. There were a shit ton of enemies and the loading distances were pretty short. My first strategy was to use the ladder near the basement door and bait them to kill each other there, but it was difficult to fight the remaining ones in such a small space. I rescued the sorcerer while securing this room to clear out the rest of the Gwyns. Yeah, good luck getting out of here, buddy. You're gonna be fucked. Some of the Gwyns got stuck behind the doors of the buildings, but otherwise this was the same as any other area. When I reached the fog gate, I found that the Gwyns that had replaced the dogs would stick their heads outside, allowing me to kill them before I even entered the arena. Because I'm a fucking dumbass, I entered the arena with the wrong shield equipped and got absolutely destroyed by the Capra Gwyn, but mostly it was the alpha fucking camera. I made my way back to the Capra Gwyn demon, this time baiting Gwyns at the Undeadburg shortcut rather than the basement door. I quickly killed him and strut out with 11 million souls that I immediately lost to a barrage of Vorpal swords while trying to get back to Firelink. Then while trying to retrieve them, I got poked and apparently tripped over a pebble. After not leveling my character, I went to the depths to continue my quest for the large ember. I was blessed with the fortune of low-hanging ceilings and wiped out all of the Gwyns from the first room. I collected the large ember, and seeing as I was already here, decided to go through the depths and kill the gaping Gwyn. Gwyns were infesting the floorboards of this place and were growing like stalactites from the ceiling. I opened the bonfire door with the master key I bought earlier and warped to Andre to reinforce my great axe, bow, and shield to +10. Back at the depths, although there were many small corridors that the Gwyns couldn't fit through, there was recently a huge Amazon Prime shipment, so it was filled to the brim with Gwyns. However, I reached the gaping Gwyn pretty easily and tested out my newly upgraded great axe, dealing 866 damage and killing him in just 5 parries. Next was the very large ember in New Londo. This was a difficult area to complete, a lot of Gwyns and not a lot of ways to cheese them. While getting the Firekeeper soul was easy enough, I tried multiple tactics to try and clear out the rest of the Gwyns. There weren't any low-hanging ceilings nearby, and the elevator wasn't much help either. Once I killed the ones replacing the ghosts in the first area, I shot off the Gwyns on the bridge and baited the Gwyns inside the building to jump off here. Though I was expecting the narrow bridges section to be extraordinarily risky, it turned out that all the Gwyns were stuck behind a small doorway further ahead. Once they were cleared out, I got the key to the seal and emptied the water out of New Londo. I killed the Gwyns on the bottom level by shooting them from above and easily retrieved the very large ember. At this point, I didn't have enough Titanite chunks or a Titanite slab to upgrade my great axe to +15, so now my goal was to retrieve the slab from the DLC while picking up the chunks along the way. I also wanted to complete the DLC before fighting Sif because I've never gotten that bonus cutscene before, so I thought what better time than now to see it. If you think about why this is a dumb fucking idea for just a few seconds, you will realize something that didn't occur to me until several hours later. Anyway, I still needed to get the broken pendant, so I warped back to Anor Londo. I made my way to Duke's archives and got a little taste of the suffering I would experience later in the run. After spending a couple minutes riding up and down the Tower of Terror, the broken pendant appeared in my inventory, probably from a Gwyn that had fallen down at some point. I got the fuck out of there and got manhandled into the Sanctuary Garden. I was now doing over 1,000 damage per parry, and I killed the Sanctuary Gwyndian in less than 30 seconds. I thought Royal Wood was going to be a total fucking disaster with how many Gwyns were going to be in the forest, but it ended up not being that bad. It did take a while to bait all the Gwyns into jumping off this ledge, but it all went pretty smoothly until I fell down this hole like a fucking idiot and had to do it all over again. The next time I tried to sprint through it all, this Gwyn pulled a new move out of his ass and jumped into the stratosphere and dunked his greatsword on me. Gwyntorius the Cinderwalker showed off his especially droopy arms, screamed at me, exploded into a polygon, and threw some Jackson Pollock shit at me. I beat him without any issues and then got blasted into the wall while running from Gwyns. Now let me ask you a question. If your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? For Gwyn, the answer is always yes. That answer basically covers the entire strat for the outside portion of Ulasal Township, as well as the first part of the lower city section. I picked up some rubbish, killed all the stragglers inside using low-hanging ceilings, and made it to the Chasm of the Abyss. Right as I entered, I finally realized that my plan to see the bonus Sif cutscene was fucking foolish since he'd just be replaced with another Gwyn. Also, this section was probably tied with Undead Parish as the worst part of the run post-Asylum. Here's one of the reasons. Despite how hilarious that was at the time, it wasn't too funny after I had to deal with it for the next 3 hours over the course of my 50 attempts to get to Manus. And it wasn't just the lag. Think about this for a minute. How many enemies are in the Chasm of the Abyss? You probably only fight a few sorcerers on your own runs, but most people don't deal with the absolute fucking army of humanities down there. There were around 50 enemies total that turned into Gwyns here, probably more than any other area in the run. My go-to strategy of baiting them off the cliffs was not feasible as the curves were just too shallow. I tried using the elevator to maybe throw some Gwyns off that way, but it just took too long and was way too dangerous. After confirming that I couldn't hide in any of these little prison cells, I tried just running through it all and yeah. I attempted several different routes, but they'd always catch up with me and shred my ass. The strat I ended up going with ate up a couple hours of my life, and having to deal with the lag throughout it all made these hours all the more frustrating. This strat took a path that required me to go as fast as possible because going too slow would allow the Gwyns further ahead to catch up and block me. After dodging all the Gwyns and praying that they didn't jump in front of me, I would jump down to this ledge and try to keep as close to this edge as possible. This was to ensure all the Gwyns following behind me would fall off into the abyss. As you can see, the Gwyns in front of me are falling to the ground below me. From there, they had a couple of options as to what they could do next. The best option for me was when they tried to attack me without regards to my height, grouping them underneath me and promoting friendly fire. They would eventually break out of this though and take one of two paths. The left path was safe with no threats, while the right path could lead them to falling off into the abyss or would lead them to taking a much longer route back. In the worst of cases, Gwyns would successfully jump to my level, forcing me to fight them with the threat of falling to my death close by. There were several other things that made clearing out this area different from any other location in the game. The 50-ish Gwyns were all loaded in at once, which normally would be great, but in this case I had no way to cheese them. Furthermore, due to the differences in aggro states as well as pathfinding, there would be instances where Gwyns got tangled up together. This was ideal when I could see them and do some damage, but it also resulted in far off Gwyns getting stuck and then literally appearing 20 minutes later to spook me. After a few attempts and feeling half confident that I had cleared out most of the Gwyns in the area, I finally jumped down and safely got to the fog gate. Underneath, I caught a glimpse of a Gwyn near where Sif should have been. I freaked the fuck out and ran straight into the boss arena, but in retrospect, it's quite possible that that was Sif, especially since he wasn't aggroed. Anyway, upon entering the arena, I was apparently possessed by a vengeful demon and taken to Gwynis, father of the Cinder. I killed him quickly, ignored the moaning woman on the ground, and had a small chat with Goth, who had given up wood carving to pursue the illustrious art of T-posing. I went to see the unreplaced Calamy and dunked on all the Gwyns pursuing me with my ladder climbing abilities. Now, I think I could have just fought Gwynnimede here, but I didn't want to miss out on the chance that he was replaced in the cutscene where Goth shoots him out of the air. And boy did I make the right decision.
Yes. A true shot was never loose.
After bearing witness to that beautiful display of marksmanship, I got the Titanite slab, killed Gwynnimede, and got the fuck out of Ulasil. The last thing I needed to complete my demon's greatest axe was one more Titanite chunk that I planned to get from Snuggly. This meant I had to turn myself into an egg and go to the one place I never wanted to see again. Upon arriving back in the asylum, I was immediately ganked several times by Gwyns. I tried baiting them briefly, but in the end just running past them sufficed. I fought my way through the asylum, reliving the traumatic experiences that had haunted me since escaping this place. I picked up the peculiar doll, dropped my rubbish for Snuggly, defeated the stray Gwyn, picked up my Titanite chunk, and left. Yeah, just imagine if my first visit had gone as smoothly. Now I had finally reinforced my Demon's Great Axe to plus 15, but I wasn't satisfied yet. My final objective in my quest to exact unholy retribution upon the Gwyns was the Hornet Ring, which boosts riposte damage by 30%. I returned to Darkroot Garden and found a Gwyn that had for some reason spawned underground. I thought this land shark was completely harmless, that is, until he grabbed me. Once I returned from my visit to the Void, I took a quick detour to the Sunlight Butter Gwyn. One of my friends asked me how it was possible that this boss could even spawn, considering the Moonlight Butterfly seems to spawn in the air somewhere outside of the arena. The answer is that, at least in the cases I've seen, the randomizer puts replacements at the end of the bridge. I assume this is to prevent what happens if the boss is outside of the arena, which can also occur if the boss is able to jump off. Once they leave the bridge, they disappear from existence but don't actually die, trapping you in the arena with an unemptied boss health bar. This was a fear I had during this battle, as Gwyn does have a dodge where he could theoretically jump over the side of the bridge, but I defeated him before he got the chance. This time around, I ended up resting at this bonfire and despite my earlier concerns was not in any danger of being spawn killed. The only obstacle standing between me and the Hornet Ring were these Gwyns in this ruined building, who I just had to kill fairly. I pushed open the doors, got the Hornet Ring, and what do you know, I actually got the bonus cutscene. And what in the sweet fucking Lordran is that? Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, look at its legs! Its legs, the way it walks! Get it the fuck away from me. Oh, ew, 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 ew. Oh, it's terrifying. Holy shit, what in the world is that? It's so fucking awful. Its mouth, it's unhinged. What the fuck? Oh my god. I immediately died from having witnessed that, but I made my way back and euthanized that abomination for good. With my new Hornet Ring, I now dealt a whopping 1,655 damage, meaning I could defeat Gwyn in just 3 riposts. Doesn't that just bring tears to your eyes? In Asylum, I thought I had to at worst complete 62 parries and at best 47 parries just to kill a single Gwyn. Nevertheless, a multitude of Gwyns was still a threat to me, so I cheesed them when I could and only fought them one-on-one when it was absolutely necessary or when I got lazy. Now there was one last aspect of my character I could improve, and that was my healing ability. Thus, I went to the catacombs in the Tomb of the Giants in order to 1. Get the Rite of Kindling and boost my max Estus to 20 per kindled bonfire, and 2. Move Patches and Rhea to Firelink to buy their healing miracles. Getting to the first bonfire in the catacombs was remarkably easy this time. The rest of the area was almost completely harmless as low-hanging ceilings were omnipresent. Really, like there's no threats here. Everything can get stuck behind something without even luring it. I skipped a lot of the area by jumping down to the shortcuts and used the fall control I bought from the sorcerer to drop to the bottom area. I ignored the Gwyns down there and just went straight to the fog gate and encountered Gwynwheel. I beat his ass as easily as I would have beaten the normal Pinwheel and got the Rite of Kindling. I had a good amount of humanity that I had collected throughout the run, so I kindled nearly every bonfire I could to 20 after this point. Next was to get to Patches and Rhea in the Tomb of the Giants. I thought this area was going to be hard since I couldn't see shit, but oh yeah, how could I forget? A good portion of the Gwyns here actually took care of themselves, either by falling to their deaths or attacking each other on the lower levels. Patches warmly greeted me by yeeting a Gwyn at my face. As punishment, I made him shove his foot up my ass and throw me into a pit of Gwyns. I picked up the Skull Lantern, killed the idling Gwyns one by one, bullied some Bullcut boys, and talked to Rhea to receive Replenishment, a gradual healing miracle. I made my way back to Patches and forgave his treachery, knowing that I'd need him later. Moving on, I skipped the next bonfire initially out of fear of getting spawn killed and went right towards the boss. In this smooth-looking cave area, I just baited all the Gwyns to jump off. A little ways ahead, I had a massive lag spike caused by all these baby skeleton motherfuckers. They were behind a wall, so I was completely safe. All I had to do was to wait for them to kill each other until there was only one left. Wait for them to kill each other until there was only one left. Kill each other until there was only one left. Until there was only one left. One left. One left. One left. One left. One left. Oh no. I ran back to the bonfire and tried to think of how to get past the infinitely respawning Gwyn babies. First, at least kindling the bonfire would... Oh no. For the first time in this run, I had actually gotten myself into a spawn killing loop. You'd think that with all these cliffs around that wouldn't happen, but it did. Fortunately, I still had a couple seconds before they deli sliced my ass. After 7 attempts of trying to use a humanity, restore my human form, and kindle the bonfire, I finally got my Estus count up to 20. Then I had to make a mad dash to the Gwyn babies through all of these Gwyns. Thankfully, once I dropped down the hole where the ladder was, they didn't seem to follow me at all. At the Gwyn babies, it became obvious that trying to run through them was just going to be a matter of sheer luck. I waited a while for the Gwyns to kill any of the Pinwheel replacements that also spawned in the area, as they wouldn't respawn and less Gwyns means less of a chance of me dying. Once there was an opening, I sprinted through, keeping to the left and jumping over this small gap. It only took me around 3 tries to successfully do it, but only after many attempts of trying to get past the spawn killers. I woke up the dead Polygon Gwynito from his coffin and beat him easily. I was deeply disappointed that the skeletons in the boss arena weren't replaced by Gwyns. I'm not really sure why when all the other skeletons were, but the spawn killing and Gwyn babies presented a formidable enough challenge to where I wasn't upset. I returned to Firelink and was alerted by Bullcut Boy that a fair maiden was in need of rescuing. I once again braved Undead Parish, this time using the elevator to effortlessly cheese all of the Gwyns. I talked to Rhea and was blessed with 3 new healing miracles. I was overjoyed, but I couldn't help but feel I was forgetting something. Oh yeah, the Dark Seance Ring. I trekked back to the catacombs and got the ring without any issues. From this point on, I had made myself as powerful as I could be, so my only goal now was to defeat the rest of the bosses. I decided to complete the Duke's Archives first. I had already been there once before when I was getting the broken pendant, but now I'd actually have to get past all those Gwyns on the elevator. The Duke's Archives was incredibly difficult due to the high ceilings present in almost all of the areas. I'll skip all the crying and wasted time I spent trying to figure out a strat here and just go right to the success. This is probably the most technical strat in the entire Post-Asylum run. Before even getting on the elevator, I had to go outside and take care of the 3 Gwyns that spawned in the nearest building of Anne Orlando. There's an aggro wall here that I needed to free up, which could also be used to take these Gwyns out. After that, it was back to the elevator. As you can see here, Havel's shield works alright when trying to block the attacks on the descent, but I still got staggered, giving them the opportunity to inflict massive damage on me. To remedy this, I used the shield's stone skin buff to increase my poise, and made sure to activate it before I reached the apex of the elevator's ascent. The entire way down, I would be managing my stamina bar and blocking the Gwyns' attacks as best I could. Though the stone skim buff helped me from losing huge amounts of my health, I still took some damage on most of the rides down. Thankfully, grab attacks don't work on elevators, so they just do a negligible amount of damage if they hit. Once I had reached the bottom, I would then run all the way outside, praying that I wouldn't get hit from behind. Just like the Anne Orlando Gwyns, the Duke Archives Gwyns were also subject to this aggro wall, just on the other side this time. I then used the good old shoot arrows till they die strat. After killing them, I would have to repair my great shield with multiple repair powders as the stone skin buff drained almost all of its durability after each use. Then I just had to repeat that whole strategy an agonizing amount of times, and it was fairly risky too. If I had bad luck and too many Gwyns jumped on board, there would simply be too many attacks flying in at once to guard against and my ass would get ganked. After over an hour of attempts, I finally cleared out most of the Gwyns in the immediate area and ascended the stairs to get my ass bedazzled by Seath. Remember when I was complaining about the spawn killing in the Tomb of the Giants? It was nothing compared to the ass-slapping fever dream I experienced in this prison cell. I was lucky that I used miracles instead of Estus flasks on my way here, or I would have been absolutely fucked as there's no way I could have kindled this bonfire under these conditions. Because I couldn't kindle, this meant I would have to do this in one attempt or it was going to be exponentially harder going forward. After a few minutes of dying over and over again, I eventually was able to clear out the Gwyns myself through a combination of guarding and encouraging friendly fire. I killed the guard on the outside and retrieved the key to witness a new nightmare unfold. Dude, fuck that shit. I don't know what kind of whack-ass Mensis ritual is going on out there, but I am not fucking with it. In all seriousness, this part was relatively easy. I just waited a painfully long time for them to walk their asses all the way up the stairs, and then watched them sacrifice each other to the great ones they worshipped. Once they were all cleared, I got the key, ended the cacophonous plin-plin-plons, and made my way back up to the door. The next section was one of the most stressful parts of the entire run. There are a shit ton of Gwyns in the archive, and the loading here was the worst imaginable. To top it off, there were no low-hanging ceilings to exploit. I had to lure the Gwyns at a dangerously close distance all the way to the ladder and then have them kill each other there. If I wanted to bait them to the area below, I had to get off the ladder and lure them from there, which wasn't a good idea as it just made the area and the ladder way more dangerous. I spent a long time dragging out a huge number of Gwyns and finally got to the bonfire, but can you believe it? I actually got greedy at this point. Truth be told, I didn't know if that bonfire was just going to be another spawn kill point, but I actually thought it was worth the risk to try and get farther through the archive without resting here. Like I said in the last video, happiness doesn't exist in this run. I got cornered pretty quickly and narrowly escaped death when a Gwyn threw me a few stories down next to the bonfire. I cut my losses and rested there, which was in fact pretty close to some Gwyn spawns. It wasn't as bad as some of the previous areas, but nonetheless, there was no easy way to cheese these Gwyns. I tried multiple times to get through them and find somewhere where I could gain the upper hand, but things were just not looking good. Then, by pure accident, a Gwyn choked me out and exploded me into the outside. This was it. After a few more tries at different angles, I was able to manipulate the grab to throw me to a point where I could survive the fall and run away to this ladder before the Gwyns waiting below caught up with me. After clearing out most of the Gwyns in this area, I entered the Crystal Cave. As you might have guessed, I just baited them all to jump off. I did end up luring the crab replacements to this low-hanging ceiling and shooting them from an invisible platform, but other than the usual anxiety Crystal Cave elicits, it really wasn't that bad. The Seath cutscene unfortunately was not replaced with Gwyn, but he did have Seath's regenerating abilities in the fight. I destroyed the crystal, beat Gwyth, and made my way out of Duke's archives. I suddenly remembered to get the healing miracles from patches that I had forgotten about earlier and headed towards the Four Kings. I watched these assholes dance through my arrows for a while before just running through them all and jumping into the abyss. It was a pretty average boss battle. A second Gwyn did show up towards the end, but by then it was already too late for them. Something that was super interesting was that the light being emitted from Gwyn actually lit up the floor of the abyss. I bet you didn't know there was a floor of the abyss. And it turns out, it's just made of regular old brick. After making polygons explode, I headed toward the painted world. Getting into it was pretty tough, as there were a lot of Gwyns guarding the painting, but I eventually blasted through and got transported to absolute hell. The first bonfire was an even worse spawn kill zone than the prison because there were a lot of Gwyns and no easy way to cheese them. Even worse, I would eventually get pushed back to the edge of the bridge and fall off if I just tried to guard and let them kill each other. The only option I saw was to run up somewhere ahead and hopefully find a low-hanging ceiling. The problem was I had to survive until all these Gwyns had come down the stairs because they kept blocking the way. After many attempts, I finally got past them and up to this tower. From here, I was able to see a pretty large portion of the map, which I used to my advantage and sniped most of the Gwyns I could see. One interesting thing to note is that the Gwyns that replaced the crow demons hanging on the walls could not be aggroed at all with arrows, only by proximity. They could still be staggered, however, and would remain on an invisible plane until I activated them. After coming down, I stopped this Gwyn from flexing on me, got a view of the headache that would soon come, and continued to take out Gwyns using the low-hanging ceilings I found here and there. It took a considerably long time, and baiting them wasn't very safe. I eventually made my way to these circle jerks, and while luring the last of them away from the shortcut, I got pushed off the stairs and died. A 45-minute attempt over right before the end. Drowning in sadness and flaming greatswords, I didn't realize the answer was right in front of me the whole time. Of course, all I had to do was get thrown into the next area just like the Duke's archives. I got blasted into the courtyard, opened the shortcut, and was able to run and take cover in this room. I was easily able to open up the other gate as all the skeleton wheel Gwyns were stuck below a ladder. I then was able to run to Priscilla without much difficulty.
Thou must return whence thou came. This land is peaceful, its inhabitants kind, but thou dost not belong.
Returning to the real world, I immediately got ganked, but I respawned in Anor Londo, so it worked out pretty well. I beat Gwyn with zero problems, and with his dying breath, he spouted some nonsense about setting an eternal curse on me or something, but I don't think he was aware of the damnation I was already suffering through. I warped to the demon ruins, beat the shit out of Ceaseless Gwyn, and ran towards the next boss. This area was mildly intimidating, but I was able to bait them all back to this spot in the beginning where I separated them and took them out one by one. I killed the demon Gwyn Sage pretty easily and spent a little bit of time cheesing these Gwyns on the stairs. I entered the Gwynipede demon boss room, and unfortunately, this was the only Gwyn I technically didn't kill, because he just let himself burn up in the lava. The beginning of Lost Izalith posed no problems because all of the Gwyns just let themselves die similarly. Moving into the ruins, there was an aggro wall here that I used to clear all the Gwyns out. I got to the bed of Gwyns and defeated them with no issues, just like the previous bosses. Now there was only one boss left, the true Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. I opened the way to the kiln of the first flame and witnessed Gwyn ghosts walking into the light before I had a chance to send them there myself. I defeated all the Gwyns on the way there without cheesing them, and definitely did not die to the final boss, and definitely defeated the final boss and became the new Dark Lord. Yeah, pretty anticlimactic, what did you expect? I mean, I'd basically been doing the final boss battle 3,000 times harder for most of the run. But there was one last thing I had to do. I entered New Game Plus and took out all of my sorrow and my rage on the Gwyns that had caused me so much agony. I didn't feel much better, but I didn't expect to after this run. After all, I really only did it for the clout. And with that, I had successfully beaten Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition with all the enemies and all the bosses turned into Gwyns. Fuck, dude. This run was a nightmare. I don't recommend it to anyone, especially the Asylum section. I had maybe a combined total of 15 minutes of enjoyment over the 59 hours it took me to complete this. The amount of sitting around, shooting arrows, baiting Gwyns, only to have all my progress demolished because I was unlucky was extremely demoralizing. I'm hoping the next runs I do will be more enjoyable, which is why if you have any ideas for what I could do in any of these games, or really any game you can think of, I'd love to consider it and hopefully have a pleasant experience. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to see more challenge runs in the future. Sharing this video will help this channel grow and make this run feel like it was actually worth something. If you have any criticisms or compliments, I encourage you to leave them in the comment section below. My name is Andy, and thank you for watching.